between 1946 and 1948. The United States government conducted a series of secret medical experiments in Guatemala that would later be condemned as a grave violation of human rights, known as the Guatemala Syphilis Experiments. These studies were led by physician John Charles Cutler, who had also been involved in the later stages of the infamous Tuskegee syphilis study. The stated goal was to test the effectiveness of treatments like penicillin and orvasmafficin in preventing and managing sexually transmitted diseases, particularly syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid. Unlike the Terre Haute prison experiments in the US, which involved consenting inmates, the Guatemala experiments targeted vulnerable populations without their knowledge or consent. Over 5,500 individuals were involved, including soldiers, sex workers, prisoners, psychiatric patients, orphans, and children from state-run schools. At least 1,300 people were deliberately infected with STDs, and only about half received any form of treatment. The methods used were invasive and deceptive. In some cases, researchers paid sex workers infected with syphilis to have intercourse with soldiers. In others, subjects were directly injected with pathogens. These acts were carried out under the guise of public health research, but they lacked any ethical oversight or informed consent. The experiments continued in various forms until 1953, with serological studies extending the scope to additional populations. By the end of the research period, 83 people had died, though it remains unclear how many of those deaths were directly caused by the infections or the experimental procedures. The full extent of the harm was obscured for decades. The truth began to surface in 2005 when historian Susan Mokotov, Reverby, discovered documentation of the experiments in Cutler's archived papers while researching the Tuskegee study. Her findings prompted a formal investigation and, in 2010, led to an official apology from the U.S. President, Secretary of State, and Secretary of Health and Human Services. Guatemala condemned the experiments as crimes against humanity. Despite multiple lawsuits filed in the United States, victims and their families have not received legal compensation, as courts ruled that the claims were better addressed through political channels rather than judicial ones. The Guatemala Syphilis Experiments are now recognized as a dark chapter in the history of medical research. They underscore the dangers of unchecked scientific ambition, the exploitation of marginalized communities, and the absence of ethical safeguards. In their aftermath, bioethicists and human rights advocates have worked to strengthen international standards for research involving human subjects, emphasizing informed consent, transparency, and accountability. These experiments serve as a stark reminder that the pursuit of knowledge must never come at the expense of human dignity.